invitar a este escenario a Mr. James Aabel, de la NVE, que es la Dirección y Organización responsable de la gestión de los recursos hídricos y energéticos de Noruega. Mr. James nos hablará del desarrollo hidroeléctrico en Noruega con especial énfasis en el medio ambiente. Bienvenido.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Then it's left for me to keep your attention for the last 90 minutes of this day's session, and I hope I can do it. First of all, I will apologize for not speaking Spanish, but I have realized that I am too old to learn a new language, so I hope you will understand my English. I will also like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to talk about an issue that I have been working with for around 40 years. My presentation will be about renewable energy in Norway, that is for all practical uses hydropower. And I will try to have special focus on the environment. So this is some of the topics that I will talk about. A brief history of hydropower development in Norway and what it actually has meant for the development of the society of Norway. Then something about licensing, because that has been my main work for the last maybe 15 years. A bit about hydropower production today, and a few words about wind power, because that is also renewable energy. But first, I will say a few words about the Norwegian Water Resources and Energy Directorate. We are a directorate directly subordinated the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy. And we have a mandate to, first of all, to ensure an integrated and environmentally sound management of the country's water resources, to promote efficient energy markets and cost-effective energy systems, and also contribute to an efficient use. And we have some responsibilities. Of course, national power supply, production, and transmission. And then we are responsible for national flood contingency planning and prevention of damage caused by landslide. And we do see today that these two tasks are getting more and more important, because also in Norway the weather has a tendency to be more extreme than it used to be. We have the extreme floods and also what also causes danger of landslide. Then NVE is also the national center in Norway for hydrology. And NVE has had some experience in working in developing countries, assisting them to do these tasks on our responsibilities. And we have mainly worked in Africa and in Asia on these tasks. Something about Norway. You know, now we are moving quite far away from Colombia. We are moving to the northern hemisphere, to a small country which is situated not far from the North Pole. We are an area of approximately 385, maybe 1,000 square kilometers. We are a population of around 5 million people. From the south to the north of Norway, it goes from 58 degrees north and up to 71 degrees in the upper north. And we also have islands close up to 80 degrees north. When we look at our neighbors, we have in the east 3 neighbors: Sweden, Finland, and a small part frontier to Russia. In the west, we have the North Sea, which I will show you later is quite important. And the mean annual precipitation varies quite a lot. In the western part of Norway, it is around 4,000 millimeters per year, could even be more. And in the west, only 10% of it. In the east, only 10% of it. So in this area, it is rather dry. Along the coast in the west, it is quite wet. And that has, of course, a big importance for hydropower development. The temperature in Norway varies between minus in the winter, below 0, and if we are lucky, we get to maybe 20 or 25 degrees in the summer. So let's start with the beginning. The first hydropower plant in Norway was built in 1885, and already 5 years later, a small town in the northern of Norway was one of the first in the world to have electric streetlights. That was in 1891. And at the beginning, the developing of hydroelectric power was, one, to supply for the towns and rural areas for light purposes, and secondly, power-intensive industry for pulp and paper, chemical and melting. And this industry was financed not by Norwegians, but by foreign money, because Norway did not have much money at the time. And companies in Europe found that Norway was very important for the possibility of developing power-intensive industry because of our hydropower resources. If you look at this again, you will see that on the west coast we had a lot of precipitation. We have fjords going, deep fjords going into the country, steep mountains. At the bottom of these fjords, the land drops approximately 1,000 meters, and the conditions were ideal for this power-intensive industry. So foreigners from Great Britain and from Germany, they wanted to invest in Norway to develop this industry. So, 1905 is a very important year in Norway. Then Norway became independent. Until then, we had been for 100 years subordinated our neighbor in the east, Sweden, and before that again, we were subordinated our neighbor in the south, is Denmark. But in 1905, we got our independence, and our politicians, they realized pretty soon that it was important to secure national ownership to the natural resources. So we started then to develop the different acts to regulate development of hydropower. And in 1917, we got two important acts, the Water Regulation Act and the Acquisition Act. The one is about regulating the rivers, building reservoirs and so on. The other one is about buying waterfalls. In the Acquisition Act, we have had something that's called right of reversion. And that is that those who wanted to start industry and to build power stations, if they were private companies, they could only have the rights for 60 years. And in Norway, we say that a private company is one company that is owned more than 30% of private shares, or of the shares. So after, for public companies owned by the state or by the municipality and so on, they can have it for unlimited time. But these private companies, then, most of it foreign companies, they had to give the rights and the power plants back to the state after 60 years. So in a way, we lent the resources to the companies, and the state got it back for free, and also in a good situation. They had to be well maintained. Yeah. But this was only for the large hydropower station. For what we call small hydro in Norway, there is this right of reversion is not relevant. But in 2007, you know probably that we have some agreement with the European Union. We are not member, but we have an agreement. And the European Union found out that this to treat private and public companies different was not in line with the agreement. So we had to change our law. And today, large hydro is only allowed for public companies. Private interests can own up to 1/3, but the rest has to be owned by public companies. So in this manner, Norway has been able to to keep control of their hydropower resources, although some of them were developed with foreign money. Okay, this went on, developing slowly up to World War II, 1940. And then in 1945, we started rebuilding the country after the war. And in that connection, there was a growing demand for electricity, and our resources were developed rapidly with new power plants. Here you can see the development of hydropower. Oops, sorry, that was too quick. That is up to the World War II, we developed, and then we had a rapid development. At some stage here, around the mid-1960s, there was a growing demand, the growing conscious for the environment, not only in Norway, but in many countries. And our politicians were worried that this development was not what we today would call sustainable. And also the public found that the impacts on the environment was too much. We got what we call public disobedience. You see, people, they sat down before the machines, were working in the field, and the police had to move them away to fulfill the works. But this disobedience led to, first of all, a demand for a better environmental impact assessment on this hydropower development, looking for alternatives, and also focusing on mitigating measures when they did the development. Then, in the late 60s, we got what we call an early notification, which means that the power company had to notify to NVE and to the public what were the plans, and people could comment on the plans and on the environmental impact assessment. The politicians also decided to make what we call a protection plan. And that is actually a plan where some rivers are set away not to be developed for hydropower. They said that in these rivers there will not even be a licensing process, but they are banned for hydropower development. And this plan was worked in different steps from 1973 to 2009. And in Norway, all these green watersheds are protected against hydropower development. The potential in these rivers is close to 25% of our total potential. So it's quite a comprehensive protection plan. But this could, of course, be changed in later generations, but so far there is not any possibility of developing hydropower in these rivers. But that was not enough. There were still protests against hydropower development. And in 1984, the authorities, and that means in this aspect, it means the Norwegian Water Resources and the Directorate for Nature Management. They went together to develop a master plan for further development of hydropower. And it involved also the two ministries, the Ministry for Petroleum and Energy and the Ministry for the Environment. And they worked close together as they had done with the protection plan. They continued the cooperation and a sort of grouping was set up where, and the aim was to develop the cheapest and the project with less conflict first, and then let those with the highest conflict either come later or not to come at all. And the impact assessment was made to sort of a pre-feasibility level for some 500-600 projects. And when we do licensing today, we have to do that according to the master plan. It's still valid, although it has not been really updated since 1992. What has been changed is that for small hydropower, they are exempted from the master plan, so they can be developed without checking with the master plan. Another thing that was important for Norwegian energy development was the year 1990, where we got a new Energy Act. We developed then sort of an electricity market, and it was said that the market should give the prices for energy. Earlier, electricity prices were set by the parliament, actually. Every year they said, this will be the price for electricity for the next year. But in 1990, they said that the market will decide what should be the price. So demand and offer will then decide what will be the energy price. And secondly, they opened the grid for everybody. Until then, the grid had only been open for power companies. According to the new act, everybody had the right to have access to the grid. And that, again, opened for a lot of small hydro, because now the landowners could actually build their own power plants. In Norway, the waterfalls are normally owned by landowners. If you own the land, you also own the waterfall. And a lot of farmers then built their own power plant, and they were allowed access then to the grid. And thirdly, there was no obligation for the regional power companies to guarantee production. That had been the situation before. The regional power companies, they had to see that they could deliver power to the people at any time, but now they were taken out of that obligation. So, what is a license? Yes, it is a permission granted by the authorities to develop and to run dams and power plants, specified then in the license. And it is also a license for the transmission line to be built. And a license normally includes conditions, and it includes rules of operation, how to run it. In Norway, NVE, our directorate, is responsible for the whole licensing process. But we cooperate closely with the Directorate for Nature Management and with the Ministry of Environment, as we had did before with the Protection Plan and the Master Plan. The license is granted for large hydro. It's granted by the Norwegian government, actually, to the Council of Ministers. For small hydro, this task is delegated to NVE, but any decision made by NVE can be appealed to the ministry. When it's about granting of the government, it cannot be appealed. That is a final decision, and people have to, or companies have to accept it. So let's look at the handling of the applications for hydropower development. There are three main phases. It's what we call the notification phase. When you start, as I mentioned earlier, they have to make a notification what their plans are, and people are allowed to comment on that. Then there is an application phase, when the application is ready. And finally, there is a recommendation phase or decision phase. Licensing involves a lot of acts in Norway. We have acts for buying waterfalls, we have acts for reservoirs or diversions. We have a general Water Resources Act, and as I mentioned also the Energy Act, which is relevant for also for power lines and for windmills. Then we have the Plan and Building Act, where the EIA regulations are stated. We have pollution control, cultural heritage, nature diversity, a lot of acts, but all these is handled together in one process. Although NVE is not responsible for all of these acts, the final decision, as I mentioned, is taken by the government, and the government in Norway is responsible for all the acts. So it will look more or less like this. If the project is in line with the master plan, the notification phase can start. We have consultations with other authorities and with the general public, and we also arrange a public meeting And after this process, NVE will decide or determine the EIA program. Sometimes we have consultation with the Ministry of the Environment, but NVE is finally responsible for the EIA program. So when the investigations are done, we can receive the application where the environmental impact assessment is a major part of the application. The impact assessment, environmental impact assessment is quite a comprehensive thing. It is normally in Norway done by independent consultants, but it's paid for by the developer, by the power company. And in Norway, it's very important that these investigations cover at least 12 months because the conditions in Norway are very different in summer and in winter, spring and autumn. And if you should find out something about the biologic things, about different bird species and so, you have to do investigations in summer as well as in winter. So, what do we focus on in the licensing? We focus on environmental and as well as cultural and social impacts. We focus on secure delivery of energy. And we are concerned about new renewable production. So then the main question in licensing will then be if the project is environmentally acceptable, if the benefit for the public and private interests, are they larger than the disadvantages? And we are concerned about mitigating global warming. And if a license is granted, what it very often is, because we have had the master plan and we are pretty sure that the impacts are not too big. Then we focus on conditions that can mitigate or even eliminate environmental impacts. The conditions, they are exclusively serving public interests in Norway. And the conditions will cover both the construction and the operating phase. It is not always very specified in the conditions what has to be done, but the conditions give pretty wide authorization to different sectors, to relevant sectors, such as NVE and the Directorate for Nature Management, so that they later on can impose environmental and other measures. That means that the license holder, he doesn't exactly know what are my conditions, what do they cost, but they have to accept it, and although, yeah, there could be some surprises, but Normally, these measures are not that important for the economy or the whole project. When it comes to compensation to right holders or to landowners, this is set either by agreements, or if they can't agree upon it, they have to go to the court of law and to have decided then the compensation. We have something which in Norway which we call more or less standard conditions for hydropower. And this tells about, first of all, for how long is the license valid. And in Norway, that will be for an unlimited time. However, the conditions can be revised after 30 years. So the license will still be valid, but the conditions can be revised. We also have what they call construction deadlines, which means that when you obtain a license, you have 5 years to start constructing. So you can't take the license, put it in your pocket, and starting whenever it suits you. So we have these 5 years to start constructing. Detailed plans has to be approved by the authorities at the time of the licensing. The plans are not to that detail, but the detailed plan will be approved by NVE. We have some economic compensations, which we call fees and funds, and also compulsory power. I will get a bit more in detail on that. And then we have these green conditions, the environmental conditions that are, to a certain degree, a responsibility of NVE and also responsibility to follow up by the Directorate for Nature Management. Also, some of the conditions would be what happens if the power company does not follow the conditions, and they will be then punished in some way. At most, the license can be withdrawn if they don't follow up. A bit about the economic compensation. The license conditions include various provisions for paying compensation to the local communities that are affected. Amongst others, the local municipality is entitled to 10% of the production, but they have to pay for it to a production cost. And the reason for this license power is to secure power for local electrification, for household and for small-scale industry. Today, it is more seen as a financial compensation to the municipality. They can buy the license power to a cheap price, and they can sell it again to a higher price. And for Norwegian municipalities, this license power comes up to around 300 million US dollars every year. So it's quite a good compensation for the municipality, and most municipalities, of course, are interested in hydropower development in their area. The license holder will also have to pay annual fees to the state and to the municipality. 25% of the fee goes to the state, and 75% goes to the municipality. And this sums up totally to around 100 million US dollars to Norwegian municipalities and 25 million US dollars to the state. And because of that, the hydropower municipalities in Norway are amongst the wealthiest in the country. In addition to the power and to the fee, there could also be given what we call development fund or industrial fund to promote industrial development in the municipalities. And these funds will normally have a size of between half and 5 million US dollars. I will not go in detail on the mitigating measures, just mention the minimum water flow, which is very important, and it's regarded maybe the best mitigating measures to reduce negative impacts on the rivers. We also have the rules of, we have conditions and then rules of operation. And in the rules of operation, you will find the highest and the lowest regulated river of the reservoirs. You will find seasonal restrictions on the regulation levels. For instance, during summertime, they will be allowed maybe to regulate only within 1 meter, while they, during wintertime, can lower the reservoir as much as they like. And in the rules of operation, there will also be set the minimum water supply to the rivers. And this minimum water supply is always specified. That means that the power company will know how much water they have to let passing the turbines. And this minimum water supply is maybe the most expensive mitigating measure for the power company, because that is, in their eyes, a loss that is given every year. But it is also important for the biodiversity in the rivers. Looking a bit on hydropower today, we have approximately 500 very small power plants in Norway, and we have what we call small hydro. That means between 1 and 10 megawatts. We have around 400 power plants, and a lot of projects are in the licensing queue, because, as I mentioned, the change in the energy law gives the opportunity for the landowner to build their own power plants. Then we have more than 300 larger, that means larger than 10 megawatt power plant, and around 80 of these are larger than 100 megawatt. totally, the Norwegian hydropower system has an installed capacity of 30,000 megawatts. The mean general capacity, generation capacity, is around 130 terawatt hours a year, and approximately 98% of the electricity production in Norway comes from hydropower. The utilization time is around 4,200 hours, which is then half of the time and gives a plant factor of 0.5. What is also important in the Norwegian power system is the reservoir's capacity. And the reservoir capacity in Norway is around 62 billion cubic meter, which gives a possible production of 85 terawatt hours. That means that the reservoir capacity is close to 70% of the mean production. And Norway has, this way, has a total of 50% of the total reservoir capacity in Europe. So why do we have all this reservoir capacity? Yes, it is to be found here. This is the inflow to the river. You can see in Norway we have a very little inflow during wintertime. It's freezing, and the precipitation normally comes as snow. Doesn't give any possibility of generating hydropower. A lot of inflow comes during the summertime and then in the winter again. However, the demand is different. We have the largest demand during wintertime, then less in summer, and then increasing again. So in a system where we have close to 100% hydropower, we have to use the reservoir for generation during wintertime. This was more or less the system for a very long time. We have some connections, overland connections to Sweden, to Finland, and to Russia, but it is by far enough to secure delivery of power during wintertime. And summer and winter is one aspect that we have to take care of. The other one is that when you are 100% dependent on hydropower, you have to take into account that we have dry years and wet years. And the difference between a dry year and a wet year could be 50 or 60% or more. So to be sure you can deliver electricity to Norwegian consumers, it's been necessary to have all these reservoirs. Today, we have other options, and that is a connection to the rest of Europe. The last 10 years or so, there has been building up, sorry, that was too fast, this one. Building subsea cables to Denmark and subsea cable to Holland. These are DC cables, and this one to Holland is, I think it is almost 600 kilometers long. The voltage is around 500 kV, and as I mentioned, they are DC cables due to if you transport large amount of energy, the loss will be much less if there is a DC cable. But the plans for our transmission system operator, TSO Statnett, is to develop or to build a new cable to Denmark, a new cable to Germany, and even across the North Sea, a cable to Great Britain. And that will give an extra capacity of 1400, and 700. And if we have these cables, of course, we are not so dependent of the reservoirs that we have developed for domestic supply. But the reservoirs can be used for regulating the consumption in Europe, because Europe has a lot of thermal power and nuclear power, and they have to go rather steady. They are not easy regulated. So in the future, Norway could work more or less as a regulator for the electricity production in Europe. That would give us a very important situation, probably very rentable, but it also has environmental problems, because if we have big capacity for transporting electricity to the rest of Europe, the Norwegian system will be run differently as it is today. The reservoir will be run differently, and the environmental impacts could be quite different from what they are today. So just today there is a discussion going on in Norway. How shall we evaluate this possibility of increasing the cable capacity to Europe? Yeah. So it's an interesting discussion, but you will probably, if you read about this, you will probably see that in Norway there is a discussion going on this issue. It is also a question whether these cables should be owned by the TSO or by public investors. We'll see. So, today in Norway, the production is quite much larger than the consumption. We have a surplus, and the demand has leveled out. So the prediction is that the surplus will continue. And due to that, and to reduce or not enough capacity to sell out to our neighbors what we have in surplus, the prices in Norway are said to be low. In total, we pay in Norway around 10 US cents per kilowatt hours. That will be the situation today. I read in the newspapers recently that the prediction for the coming winter is that the prices will rise dramatically, because we've had a dry summer, a dry autumn, and there could be some problems on the delivery when we come to the next spring. So we will see. So why do we continue developing? Here is our hydro potential. Developed is the blue piece of cake. The green one is protected. It's not possible to develop it. And then there is a little rest that still could be developed. So why do we still do it? Of course, we do it for economic reasons. I mean, the power company, they will make money by developing it. The authorities has also other ideas why to do it. And the most important is probably that the world needs more renewable energy to handle the climate change. And the way to handle it is to replace thermal power generation in Europe with renewable energy from Norway. That is our part of it. And in line with that, we have some international commitments. We have a project, a deal with our neighbor Sweden, what we call electrical certificates, and that is should give us the aim is to have 26 terawatt hours new renewable energy on the grid within 2021. And this certificate thinks that when you produce renewable energy, you also get a certificate together with the energy production. And every consumer in Norway and in Sweden has to buy a certain part of its production or in addition, they have to buy the certificates. So that will give, when you sell your power, you can also sell the certificates. And that is sort of a, yeah, and in this way they try to promote more development of renewable energy. It is not limited to hydropower. It comes also with the wind power and with the biopower, which is an issue in Sweden, not in Norway. And the wind power is also more of an issue in Sweden, not much in Norway. Then we have a directive from the European Union, which we have an agreement with. And they tell us that within 2020, 76.5% of our energy production, energy consumption, not electricity, but energy as total, should be renewable energy. And that is, first of all, because electricity is 100% renewable already, so it's not much to do about that. So what our challenge is to do something with the transport sector. And in Norway, there is a big focus on electrical cars. There is quite a lot of advantages and subsidies for those who buy electrical cars. And I think in Norway today there are, I don't know, around 100,000 electrical cars operating or running around. So this is a way to increase the use of renewable energy. We also have a directive regarding water regulations, and there is a convention on biological diversity that we have to follow when we develop our hydropower. The funny thing is that Norway has a lot of oil and gas resources which they develop, but they are not used for domestic purposes, but they are exported, all of it. Some small amount is probably used for gasoline and so, but for all practical purposes, we export all our oil and gas to other countries. Yeah. So how can we develop this extra hydropower? We can upgrade our existing system, reduce head loss, increase efficiency. We can get more water to the existing power plants and so on. We can build new large hydropower. And we also see that the last 10, 20 years, the precipitation in Norway has increased. So we get more water, and we also get it to different times. But first of all, we get more waters, so those who already have their power plants, they can get more production of the more water coming down. And there is also a strategy from the government for developing new large hydropower, and one for small hydro, which sums up to some 7-8 terawatt hours if it's all developed. So there are some things to be done yet. Few words about wind power, because wind power is the other realistic renewable energy source in Norway. We have tried with waves, and that was not a big success. Solar power, we have too little sun in Norway, unfortunately. So solar power is not a big issue. So the one realistically remain is wind power. But it is also difficult with wind power. NVE has granted a license to 47 projects with a possible production of 10 terawatt hours a year. So far, 1.5 terawatt hour is constructed or under construction. Half of the 10 terawatt hours, the project are appealed to the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy. The environmental organization, they are not very fan of this wind power, and the decision made by NVE can then be appealed to the ministry. And secondly, the other 4 terawatt hours, they have a legally valid license, but they don't find it rentable to develop it. It's too expensive. So in Norway, continuous development of hydropower is still cheaper than wind power. So, yeah, I think that is more or less the status for wind power. They are struggling in the wind, so to speak. Yeah, and I think that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, señor Aabel. Y concluimos este primer día con una invitación a conversar, a mantener encendido su corazón, a mantener encendida justamente esa energía vital con la que vamos a transcurrir estos otros 2 días de Congreso Mercado de Energía Mayorista 2016. Quiero hacerles una invitación especial. Tanto el CNO como el CAC tienen afuera esperando por ustedes para compartir una copa de vino o un cóctel, así que la invitación es a que hagan el recorrido por toda la muestra comercial que tenemos afuera y a que terminemos de conversar, terminemos la conversación por hoy. Los esperamos mañana sin falta, tenemos preparada una agenda académica con ponentes y conferencistas de lujo y vamos a estar nuevamente viéndonos y conectándonos con el Congreso Mercado de Energía Mayorista MEM 2016. Muchísimas gracias por su atención, por su disposición y que pasen una feliz noche.